We're all familiar with the three whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burrish is here to help.
Fostering deeper relationships, influencing behavior change, developing resilience. You're about to start winning. Here is your host, Christine Bright.
Welcome to Parenting Game. I am so glad you are here. Okay, today we are going to be talking about the birds and the bees and how you have those conversations with your kiddos. And I have to say, my hands are a little bit sweaty about it, even though I have had these conversations with my son already. My guest, Dr. Robin Buckley, just did an amazing TED Talk to help parents learn how to be a trusted resource for their kids in this area. Dr. Robin, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you coming on and just share with us. I'm really interested to know, how was it doing that TED Talk?
It honestly was a highlight of my personal and professional life. It was something that I'd been planning to do for over 3 years, and it was really validating to get up on the stage and have a majority of the audience receptive right from the beginning. And the fun part was that the other half that wasn't receptive, watching them start to shift throughout the talk and then having conversations specifically with those people after the talk.
You know, I can say I had to do a little bit of that shift. I'm past having those initial conversations with my son. He's 28 years old, and I'm gonna take some props. I feel I handled those conversations really well and did become a resource for him. I think I could have also done a little bit better, because you internally panic when your kids start asking you those questions. Now, you have a very, very bold TED Talk title. And I'll have you say it, because I want to make sure that if people are looking for it, that they get it right. So what was the actual title of your TED Talk?
The actual title is Why I Gave My Teenage Daughter a Vibrator, and You Should Too. And the funny part is that my original title was very safe and
Yes.
not that one. And Ted came back and said, you know what, we want people to watch this video, so we are going to create a clickbait title, and they nailed it.
Yeah, it was. I just checked this morning, and it's over 100,000 views. Great, feedback, overall, the feedback on it. And I have to say, when I initially watched it, I was like, I'm not so sure about this. But your story is not one of you taking the initiative to sit your daughter down and have this conversation. It came out of that moment of going, how am I going to handle this question? So would you please share with us a little bit how that scenario started, and then what put you in this position of having to have the conversations? And I'm giving you a lot of questions here, but also what led you to be like, we need to be a trusted resource for our kids in this area of talking about sex.
Absolutely. I was lucky enough that I was raised by a very strong mom who was also an OBGYN nurse. So our conversations around my dinner table as a child were very open, very candid, and very supportive. So luckily, I continued that trend with my own kids. So one day, many summers ago, when my daughter was 13, we were driving to a yoga class. So one of those innocuous situations that a lot of parents and probably a lot of your audience have been in, and all of a sudden your kid asks you something that you did not see coming. And her statement was that she had started to masturbate, and she shared with me how she was doing so. And the way she was masturbating was not safe for her body. And in a split second, and I honestly, Christine, don't even know where it came from, because it wasn't something I ever thought about. But I said to her, would you like something that can help you masturbate that might be more comfortable for your body? And she said, well, like what? And I said, well, have you heard of a vibrator? And she's like, I think so. And I said, okay, I can get you a vibrator and you can practice with it. And if you have questions, let me know. And as we're pulling away from the stoplight, I'm like, wow, I should have probably ran that past my husband or the other people that are parents in her life.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just that immediate, I want to help her. I need to help her, not only so her body was safe, but so she could explore and learn more about her sexuality and her sexual pleasure. And from that minute, it became something that I could not stop thinking about in terms of how to help parents have the conversations and wrap their brains around that. Sometimes it involves giving your kids things that were not on the parenting to-do list. Bras, tampons, braces, all on my to-do list. Vibrators were not one until that conversation.
And I appreciate you, being being a parent who was brave enough to have that conversation. Second, I really want to do a shout out to your daughters for giving you permission and allowing you to share this story, which I know is bringing a lot of relief, releasing a lot of guilt and shame for parents and kids. And, and you've done a lot of work in this area. Share with us, do you have a reason, like why, is it culture? Is it, I would have to say part of it was our faith and our beliefs that made it difficult and hard for my parents to talk about it. What can you share with parents that might relieve their guilt and maybe causing them to have a lot of fear and angst around this conversation?
Absolutely. I think to start, it's wrapping our brains as parents and as humans that sex is part of our existence. Mm-hmm. And whether we engage in it or not, that is the reality, that it's very likely for a majority of the population going to happen at some point. And if your child is coming to you with questions, I certainly advocate that there's a developmental process. And I use my mom as an example. When I first asked what it meant to have a period, I was probably 6. And she did not go into a full description of what was to come because developmentally I wasn't ready to hear about blood and discharge and all that. So she started in increments and was a great model of how you don't have to dodge the question. And I think saying to kids, oh, you're too young to know, all that's going to create is they're going to find another place to find the information. And it's probably not a place that's going to be accurate.
Absolutely.
And my fear is always that it's going to be on the internet, and our kids can be exposed to some really extreme things when they're doing innocuous searches. So being that voice, giving them enough information at whatever developmental level they're at to give them initial answers. And then as they get older, adding to the information. So never lying to them, never passing them off, but just giving them the information so they have enough to be satisfied at that point. And then as they grow, you can add to it. I think that in our society, we see sex as a shameful act in a lot of cases, and only for adults, when we know that most kids are engaging or at least starting to entertain the idea of sexual contact as early as 10, 12 years old. And they may not be ready, of course, for full exposure, but denying them answers to questions isn't going to make it go away. And I was always, and I advocate for parents, make sure you are the voice giving them the information so that you become that trusted resource, as you mentioned. And when it comes to girls, oh my goodness, our society still has this perspective of women being in the place of always being givers to others. And I think that's wonderful. But the problem is we don't teach them to also be givers to themselves. And that's a piece of this.
Yeah, absolutely. With parents, as you said, the conversation is coming. So with parenting, we often, prep for so many other things. How do you switch from formula to milk? How do you switch, to solids? How can, you give them a good self-esteem? How do you talk to them about, sports and work and in a way where you're not shaming them, you're a positive, influence in whatever they want to pursue, how do you talk to them about school and careers and driving? And we do so much prep work in all these other areas, except when it comes to talking to our kids about sex. Where or how can parents, because it's going to be a struggle, right? It just, when it's your kid, the idea of, somebody else doing it with their kid, we're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then when we're face to face with, oh no, it's my kid asking me the questions, panic and fear set in. What resources do you recommend for parents to start doing that prep work before these conversations or these questions start to be asked?
It's a lot of creative ways. The first step I think for most parents is to develop a comfort around your own sexuality and sexual practices. Make sure that it starts with, whether it's with yourself, if it's a single parent, or with your partner, and ask yourself, do I have conversations that are candid and open with that other person? Do I have these kind of conversations with myself around ideas like masturbation or practices like that? Because if we can't talk about it, again, with ourselves, with our close friends, or with our partners, it's going to be a struggle to talk about it with our child. And I think that when we reach out to friends or partners to start to develop the vernacular, to develop the comfort, those are safe places to develop that comfort level and that practice. So a lot of times when parents ask, well, how can I get comfortable and be ready for this conversation? It starts with themselves and making sure they utilize opportunities to practice with trusted peers. From there, and one of the biggest things I tell parents to do is follow the same social media that your kids follow. So as an example, and my husband still rolls his eyes over this, but when Snapchat became a thing and my kids were old enough to have permission to be on Snapchat, which there were some issues around that, and everybody has to decide for themselves, but I got on Snapchat because I wanted to be aware of the things they were being exposed to at some level. So when I heard, for example, a group of their friends and one of my kids in the back seat talking about something on TikTok or Snapchat, I had a frame of reference because I probably saw it. If I didn't, I was darn well going to go look it up so that I knew what they were being exposed to. And I think when we start to connect with our kids through the media that they are exposing themselves to, it helps. So every once in a while I'd say, oh yeah, I saw that on TikTok. And my kids would look at me like, what do you mean? You're on TikTok? And I'm like, yeah, I follow it. I just like to be aware. And in my profession, it was easy to say, you know what, when I work with teenagers, it's really important for me to know what they're following and what they're paying attention to, even though it was also a way for me as a mom to do the same for my own kids. So that becomes part of it. When they hear us talking about things they're familiar with, I think it starts to create that bridge. I never think that a parent should be a friend to their kid before the child is an adult. But at that level, when they're, children, preteens, and teens, having those bridges so your kids actually see you as human and a real person rather than just a parent, I do think it helps to build their comfort around sometimes asking really challenging or personal questions. And then it's a matter of finding the resources that work best for parents. I mean, there's so much out there. And I can certainly rattle off books and people to follow. But I think what it comes down to is taking some time, like any project in our lives, we take the time to do research and to find, media that really connects specifically with us. And I think that's important, that you could hear the same words from two different people, but one person it's going to really impact you and the other person you're going to blow off. And when it comes to talking about sex and understanding sexuality for kids, it's finding the voices that really resonate best with you. So you develop a way of talking about it that is truly your own style, your own authentic style. So you don't sound like you're just repeating something you heard on a YouTube video or in some book.
It is about, I love that you give parents freedom to do that. Mm-hmm. There isn't like this set recipe, this is the one book, you sit down and do it. Find your comfort level in having this conversation. Mm-hmm. Is there a set age where, okay, we're going to sit down and do the talk? We know in schools that happens around 5th grade. They start having those health classes. But in the home, do you wait and let the kid lead with the questions? Or is it pertinent to maybe have, okay, at age 13, we're definitely going to be sitting down and talking about this? What's been your feel or experience with that?
Yeah, so I'll give you the ideal, Christine, and this is hard because a lot of parents come and talk and ask me questions when their kids are already preteens or teens. So certainly the ideal is from the minute you decide you're going to be a parent and you have a child in your house, a baby in your house, you start being comfortable just having conversations. And not that my mom was perfect, because none of us are perfect as parents by far. But what she did really well is there was always just, we would ask questions, she would give answers that were developmentally appropriate. As I said earlier, she would bring up topics. When we were driving in the car, that was the big one. Driving in the car at dinner time, she would just bring up random topics. And as a nurse, it certainly lent itself easier because she had a lot of stories from her night at work working with pregnant moms or women in general. But she made sure there was just a constant stream of conversation about topics that for some people might be really uncomfortable, and it wasn't necessarily about masturbation and sex. It was about bodies in general or feelings that people might have in relationships towards each other. So there was just this constant undertone of everything was open for us to discuss. That made it a lot easier as I got older and as I've watched parents who do this. It wasn't a surprise for parents to say, hey, I know you've just started dating. Maybe we're going to have a conversation. I want to make sure you know that there are condoms in the bathroom. No questions. They're just there for you or your friends to make sure that they stay safe. I want to make sure that you have these conversations with your pediatrician or your family practitioner or your GYN. It just becomes part of what the parents are doing. My kids, and again, far from perfect, but in this way, they know, and they'll tell their friends, when you come into our house, just know if you ask a question, you're going to get an answer. And I really love that. I look at some of my parenting and I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? But that area, I'm like, okay, I'm glad that they know, when my 28-year-old son, who gave me permission to share this, when he decided to get a vasectomy a year ago, he shared it with us. And he didn't ask our opinion because he was old enough to make his own decision, but he told us why he was doing it. And I applauded him for making a really conscious choice and for his reasons for making the choice. And I made sure he understood all the logistics, which of course he had. But being able just to have these conversations, even now when he has questions about his interactions with his girlfriend, he will ask. And I'm like, wow, 28 years old and he's still asking about his really intimate life. And I think that's really kind of the goal for a lot of parents, is to be there at any point to answer questions or just to listen.
The point that I love that you made that's really important is we have to build an atmosphere in our home to be comfortable to have conversations, all conversations. I think sometimes parents don't do that, and then when this important conversation comes up about sex, then they just sit down and have it and expect it to be received well, to be able to have like an actual back and forth conversation. But if that isn't the atmosphere in the home overall, it's not going to happen. So I really appreciate you saying this isn't, okay, well, now I think I'm going to start getting questions about sex and sexuality, so, I'm just going to throw out these random questions, or all of a sudden we're just going to be sitting down and having talks. As a parent, when you have those littles, you just got to make a decision that that's going to be your home. Yeah. That we are going to be a home that talks and has conversations, and then it happens so much, more naturally.
Right.
You also talked about, bringing other people into the conversation. And you also talked about have you seen, is it helpful to, maybe give your child an age appropriate book? And if they're not comfortable like reading it right with you, like, hey, you go, read this and then we're going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Is there, media that has been, helpful for parents to get that conversation started? What's been your experience with bringing in those other resources?
I think that more and more I'm seeing lots of a variety of options, whether we're talking about sex or bodies or LGBTQ issues. There's a lot of media out there that is age appropriate and developmentally appropriate. And I think that when it comes to these kind of topics, it's important and okay for you to give your child some say. Now, I don't say that very often, especially when it comes to kids under 18. Like, yes, some say, and as they get older, a little more say. But when it comes to this, for example, one of my clients brought her 7-year-old to Barnes & Noble, and she said, here are some books that I think we should, put in your library. Which of these look good to you? And to let a 7-year-old have some say over, I want that book. And for whatever reason, mom had already screened and kind of hand selected mm-hmm. some, but from the 5 or 10 she had, she said, let's pick 3 that you think would be good for us to have in the library. And then she took it a step farther and said, who would you like to read this with? Do you want me? Do you want your dad? Do you want your, she also had step parents and an older brother who was about 10 years, so he was around 17. She allowed her child to choose who would be the most comfortable person to start with. And the little girl actually chose her older brother, and who had already been prepped that he was going to be on the list, so he wasn't blindsided. And he read the book, one of the books that his sister had chosen together with her. And then mom followed up after they read it, when she was tucking her daughter in. She said, I'm glad you got to read it with your brother. Do you have any questions? Is this something that, you want to talk about? And her daughter said, no, not right now. And she said, I just want to go to bed. And mom said, okay. And then the next day on the way to school, mom brought it up again. Just want to remind you, if you want to talk about it. So she actually prompted her daughter about 3 or 4 times over the next couple of days. And by around the second or third day, I forget which it was, the daughter said, Mom, can we talk about this? And sure, she said it in her childlike way, but she said, yes, I want to read it with you. Again, the mom wasn't blowing it off or pushing it off. She was keeping it present. She was keeping it part of the conscious conversation and allowing her daughter to choose when the conversation was going to happen. And again, offering, if you don't want to talk about it with me, there's a lot of other people in our family who are happy to talk to you about it. Giving kids that kind of choice of what, how to do it, certainly framing it as it's going to be done. Mm-hmm. Maybe not saying it that way, but certainly saying, here's some books. We are going to choose some. Which ones would you like? It allows for that wonderful blend of parental boundary setting, but child in.
The other, question, I shouldn't say question, concern that I have received from parents is this fear, if we start the conversation, now they're going to be out having sex everywhere.
Right.
So, ease my parents' thoughts on this. Is that the case?
It is not. Whether you have the conversation or not, when your child decides to have sex, they're going to have sex. You know,
Yeah.
one of the hardest thing, as you know, Christine, as parents, is to realize there are some things that we are not in control of, and that choice by our children is not under our control. We can give them all the ethics and morals and information, but when they decide to, we're not going to be in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So having the conversation is not going to prompt them or build a curiosity. They're already curious. They're already looking. And again, you know, when I think about the level of exposure our kids have because the internet is so easily accessible through their cell phones, they're going to find there are things when my daughter was in 7th grade, and I asked her a question one day, I'm like, do you know what that term is? And she did. And it was about an explicit sex act. And she had never had a boyfriend. We hadn't, I mean, she had asked random conversations, but nothing really specific. And I'm like, how do you know what that is? And she said, the internet. So they're going to find information. It's whether you want to give them the information to either back up accurate things they find out about or to balance some of the really horrendous myths and flat out lies that are on the internet.
Yeah. You know, one of the biggest compliments I got from my son, we didn't have him take the class that they were giving at school. We chose to have those conversations at home. And he actually came back, I think it was a week later, and because they are talking about it. And he goes, Mom, okay, so it was embarrassing to talk to you and Dad about it, but I'm so glad you did. My friends are really confused. And I was like, okay, parenting win. But you know, it did have a lot of angst. It's not an easy conversation to have. But you know, my experience has been too with parents, if you open that door, it actually puts the brakes on for kids. When they know they can talk about it with their parents and start thinking through it and processing it, it really does help them kind of pump the brakes on those decisions. Robin, I'm sure I'm going to be getting a lot of feedback about this episode. You know, it's the week of Valentine's Day, so I think it's timely that this is going to be this is out and airing. And I know I'm going to be having you back. But in the time being, please share your website with our audience.
So when people want to connect with me or ask questions, they can find me at drrobinbuckley.com, all one word, no period.
Oh, thank you so much for being my guest. This was so great. I'm not as panicky as I thought I was going to be. Great advice for parents. I appreciate you. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Parenting Game.
We're all familiar with the 3 whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burrish is here to help.
Thank you for watching The Parenting Game. All episodes of The Parenting Game are available on demand at sunprairiemediacenter.com.